Good morning, British and American culture. Today, we are going to continue our journey through the 16th century. This is chapter 3 in your textbook. This is the biggest chapter, so you'll notice that I'm going to lecture on it again today. This is partly because the 16th century is the area which I've studied the most, literature-wise and history-wise. It's also because it's just a very interesting century where a lot of things happen, a lot of things change, at least the change accelerates in English culture, and the Scottish and the English cultures start to embark on a path that's more intertwined. They've been trading and fighting and sharing language and art and knowledge for a long time, but they've remained separate except for some intermarrying between the kings and queens. But by the end of the 16th century, the King of Scotland and the King of England are going to be the same person. So things start to converge. The two countries start to be intermingled. They're still distinctive. The cultures are still very distinctive. If you go to Scotland, it's a totally different place. I've never been. My family has, but just so if there's any Scottish people that listen to this, I'm not saying that Scottish culture disappeared. I'm just saying more and more things become involved in the relationship. They become closer and closer until we have this thing called British culture. We don't actually have it yet. We're still talking about Ireland, Scotland, England, and Wales at this point. Although Wales is sort of integrated since it was conquered by Edward I, the Hammer of the Scots, but actually more the Hammer of the Welsh. So we've got this far. We've talked about Henry VIII. I talked about his wives and his personality last class. He's a larger than life figure who you can say, sometimes there's people in history that just make a big difference, and their personality, if they weren't there, who knows how history would have gone. Yi Sun-shin is definitely one of those people in Korean history. Everybody knows him because arguably, if he was not there, then the Japanese would have conquered Korea during the Imjin War, and he would have tried to invade China and probably would have failed, but it would have been a totally different situation. The Chosun kingdom might have fallen and become in a completely different place. And so Yi Sun-shin is a hero of Korea. Now, Henry VIII is not exactly a hero. He's famous, he's interesting, he's important, but he's not a hero. Let's be clear. There's going to be a few people like that during the next couple of weeks that are very important people, but you can't exactly call them heroic because they didn't really save people in England or Scotland. They just changed the course of history. Now, this is not a history course, actually, as you know, but it has kind of gone that way for a while so far. That's because we needed all this background to understand what's happening right now. By the 16th century, if you don't understand all the medieval stuff and the Roman stuff up until this point, you can't really understand why the 16th century is so important. It's partly because there's a political revolution, and there's partly because there's a religious revolution, and they're connected to each other. So today we're going to talk about I think I've decided we're going to talk about the religion today, and then we'll come back to Queen Elizabeth and her older sister and younger brother, the children of Henry VIII, and how they affect English culture in their decisions and their roles. But I would like to talk about what happens to English religion after Henry VIII decides that he's going to create the Church of England, and it's not going to be part of the Catholic Church in Europe. Martin Luther has already started the process in the Germanic countries, in the Netherlands and Germany. And actually, Henry VIII hated that, but he decided for his own personal reasons and political and financial reasons, as I explained, to also break from the Catholic Church. So this is going to have a huge impact on English life and British life later. So before I go on, there is no quiz, obviously, today. 10 o'clock is already passed, so if there was a quiz, it'd be a big problem. Next week, there is quiz number 3. It's going to have a lot of stuff compared to the first 2. I think there's a lot of material. Chapter 3 is the biggest chapter in the book, and I do know more about it, so there's a little bit more material. The week after that is the midterm. So next week, quiz number 3. The week after that is week 8. That's our midterm. That's also going to be on Friday. It's also going to be at 10 o'clock, and it's also going to be online. Okay? I will talk about the midterm next week when our quiz is done. But basically, there's a multiple choice section and there's a written section. You will have 40 minutes to do the quiz. It'll be from 10, not quiz, midterm, from 10 until 10:40. And that'll be it. It'll close at 10:40 the way it's supposed to. I know the limiter didn't work last week, but you only have 40 minutes. So you must submit your exam by 10:40, which means before 10:40, not at 10:40. 10:39, you have to submit it, okay? Just like usual, the Cyber Campus, I'll just put it up for the length of the whole period. It'll be open, and then it'll close at 10:40, but your attendance, you'll only have to be logged in for 5 minutes. So whenever you're done your exam, you'll be able to just hand it in. If you're done at 10:25, you can just hand it in. So next Friday, normal 10-minute quiz, and then 2 weeks from now, midterm exam, 40 minutes long. Okay? The final exam will be in person, so we won't have to worry about that. It'll be a similar format, but that's at the end of the semester. And hopefully by then, the coronavirus will be under control. Right now, we're having a bit of a problem, so we're definitely doing our midterm online. That was the plan anyway, so we're going ahead with that. Third thing, by the midterm date, by 2 weeks from now, the Friday after next, you need to submit an assignment. There are only 2 assignments in this class, one in the first half and one in the second. This one's pretty simple. I would like you to write about a person, a place, or an event. It can even be an object that is related to British culture, okay? So it can be anybody or anything up until the present. It doesn't have to be until the 16th century. So you can talk about Winston Churchill, or you can talk about Princess Diana, or you can talk about Buckingham Palace, the Elizabeth Tower, okay? You can talk about the Union Jack, the flag. These are all possibilities. So what I want you to do is at first I want you to describe it. What is it? What does it look like? What is it for? Why was it created? Okay? To do this, in the textbook, in the introduction, there is a section that discusses about social, cultural, and historical context when you're talking about cultural symbols. So what I'm asking you to do is choose something, and you got to discuss the social context, when it was made, who made it, what it meant in the period that it was created. The Union Jack was created hundreds of years ago, and what did people think about it, and how was the decision made to make this flag? Okay? The Taegukgi in Korea has a similar thing. Somebody created that at the time. There was a moment where there was decisions made, and at the time, that was the moment it was created. Then you can talk about, was there a flag before? Was it the first flag? What happened to the flag afterwards? Was it changed? Was it used in different situations? There's a history of it too. right? There's an origin of it. That's historical context, okay? And the cultural context is the meaning of it, the ideas, right? What does it represent, right? So, I mean, the Union Jack does represent union. It's a combination of different countries' flags and overlapped on each other, and it symbolizes the act of union in 1707. So if you're going to talk about a person, you can talk about what happened during their lifetime, what people thought of before and after them, and then you can talk about what people think of the idea of them now. What do they represent? If you're talking about Winston Churchill, of course, he had parents, and he grew up, and he did certain things, and then he died. And he left a lot of writing, and he made a huge impact on World War II. But he also represents certain things. He was a conservative man, and he was an imperialist. He believed in the British Empire, and that's the cultural context of the person. You shouldn't take him out of context, because now there is no British Empire. So if Winston Churchill lived now, he might behave differently. But at the time, he was pro-empire, very pro-empire. He wanted to keep the British Empire together. He thought it was better that the British Empire exists. He was very pro-imperialist. That is a cultural context. That's an aspect of him that we know about and we can talk about. So, introduce the thing, the person, the event that you choose, and then describe what it is and explain its different aspects and give your own perspective. That's what I want. It's kind of like a report on a certain thing that you're interested in, a certain part of British culture that you're interested in. Do a little bit of research and write 1 to 2 pages and hand it in. You have 2 weeks to do that, starting today, and the assignment closes 2 weeks from now. The day of the midterm is the last day you can hand it in. Okay, so that's your first assignment, and that'll be graded, and when I get them done, I'll give you a grade. Okay, so back to today's topic. We're going to talk about religion, as I said. So the Christian church, the Catholic Church, was at one point the only church, and any other type of Christian belief, any new church or group of people that believed something else, they were called heretics, right? It's called heresy. It's kind of illegal church behavior, not accepted by the Catholic Church. So when we talked about John Wycliffe a few lectures ago, that he was considered a heretic. His beliefs were heretical because they were against the rules and guidelines of the Catholic Church. These are called heresies. There were many of them, but the Catholic Church actively tried to suppress them whatever way was necessary. Political pressure, imprisonment, threats, excommunication from the church, like isolation. So you were not allowed to come to church and be part of Christian society if you said these things. The worst kind of heretical behavior is blasphemy, which is basically saying something that's completely against the belief of the church, like God doesn't exist, or other things that's God is a goat or something like that. These are directly against the belief of Jesus and of God, and the Trinity, the Holy Spirit. So those behaviors were always dangerous. But Martin Luther in Germany decided that it was necessary because he believed that the Catholic Church had started to change and it wasn't behaving in a true Christian. It wasn't being managed or run, and the behavior of many of the leaders of the Catholic Church was wrong. Part of this was related to selling something called indulgences. You were allowed to pay to forgive yourself, to get forgiveness for certain things. So, we talked about the Crusades. The Crusades, one of the things about the Crusades were if you went on the crusade, if you had done something wrong, according to church law, you had cheated or stolen or been disloyal to your wife or committed some sort of sin against other people or the church or God, that if you went on the crusade, you could be forgiven. You could get forgiveness through that. It's called a dispensation. So if you went and fought in the Holy Land to fight for Jerusalem and Christianity against Islam, then that would allow you to cancel your bad behavior and get your be able to enter heaven despite your bad behavior. This idea continued to be very lucrative for the church, and as you can imagine, they had a lot of expenses. They had to pay for the maintenance of buildings and food and taking care of the poor and education. They had a lot of things to pay for, but the church started to, even though it was already very wealthy, want more of these revenue streams is what we would call it these days. And one of the means for that was to sell indulgences. So you could pay for yourself if you did something. Even if you murdered somebody, you could go to the church and pay a big amount of money, and the church would say, okay, we forgive you. And then you could, have the peace of mind that you wouldn't be judged when you died for that crime. So that's how it was working. And it started to get pretty ridiculous. You could pay for future indulgences. So like if I'm going to do something bad next year, I can pay for a free pass for bad behavior next year. And I can pay for my dead uncle who did, he was a murderer and then he died without being forgiven by the church. But if I make a big donation, then the church will forgive him and his spirit can rest. All kinds of manipulation of this selling of forgiveness was happening. And Martin Luther thought this was completely against the Catholic Church. It made him very, not just frustrated or disappointed, made him angry. And so he protested by nailing his opinions to the church door after he had drank too much. He's not the first one to do this kind of thing, to disagree or protest, but because of the hard times amongst the regular population, there was something called the Little Ice Age going on. So the weather was bad again, just like it was in the 14th century. Weather was a little bit colder. The population was growing again, so there was pressure for jobs and for food and for space. And the fact that the Catholic Church was getting wealthier and wealthier. They were building St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, one of the largest building projects and most expensive building projects ever in the world. Certainly at the time, it was one of the biggest. The only projects of similar size would have been in the Chinese Empire or in India. It was definitely the biggest project in Europe. It was pulling in huge amounts of money from Germany especially, but from all over the place. The Catholic Church was pulling in all of this money to build this enormous, gorgeous monument to Christianity. Absolutely amazing thing that we're probably all thankful that we can go and see now. But at the time, if you were a peasant who was starving in Germany or England and you had to, give your money to the church, or you're watching, huge amounts of money being given by wealthy people while you were struggling, and it being sent to Rome, and you were never, ever going to get close to this monument, you might start to be a little bit disillusioned with the Catholic Church. So this was going to eventually cause these religious wars where all of Europe would fight Catholics versus non-Catholics, but not yet. What happens is they start to practice, their beliefs in a different way, and immediately people start to disagree. Some people become Reform. Some people become Calvinist after a person named John Calvin. Some people become Lutheran after Martin Luther. And some people become Anglican because of the Church of England. Because Henry VIII decides he's going to make his own church. So in the textbook, there is an important section there in chapter 3 where it describes to you just the basic differences between Catholic and Protestant, okay? This is very important that you read this. So I'll read them to you. And what I say is these are the core ideas. The Catholic ideas work better because the Catholic Church is unified. It has one set of rules and it has a pope. And you're all supposed to basically follow the same pattern and participate in church the same way. But the Protestant church is just all the churches that formed that were different than the Catholics. So they're all different from each other. So to say all Protestants do something is it's not true, because there's radical Protestants and there's moderate Protestants. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But first, let's just go over the basic differences, the core ideas that are different between Catholic and Protestant. So in the Catholic Church, first of all, there's a pope. And then there's cardinals and archbishops and bishops and deacons and all the way down. Just like the great chain of being, and the king, right? And the earls and the dukes and the counts and the barons. That's kind of one of the reasons why kings and queens generally liked Catholic religion, because the structure of the Catholic Church was a triangle, a hierarchy, just like the social structure of the kingdom. The ranks of the social classes were the same as the ranks of the religious classes in a sense. So, their structures matched. There's no democratic, big group of people electing individuals at the top. There's a pope at the top and there's a king at the top. And that structure is attractive to a king. So, strict hierarchy, pope at the top, all the way down to the bottom, where you have just low-level priests and clerics. They do have elaborate ceremonies and they have celebrations and festivals. The Catholic Church, to a certain extent, was, I have to say, more fun, more interesting in terms of the schedule. There's a whole calendar. And if you're a devout Catholic, there's all kinds of days and holidays and festivals and things that you have to attend. But they're not in the Bible. They're created by the Catholic Church. So the Protestants didn't like that. You have decorative sanctuaries and decorative buildings. Lots of art built into the walls, stained glass windows, sculptures, and that sort of thing. You can worship Mary, the mother of Jesus, as a representation to help represent your concerns to God. You can use intermediaries, and you can worship saints and shrines, and that's what you cross yourself and you invoke the name of the saint or make donations to the saint. The Protestants consider this idolatry. They consider it you can't pray to things that are not God. So saints and the Virgin Mary, the elevation of the Virgin Mary to a figure like God is a Catholic thing, not a Protestant thing. As I mentioned before, the Bible is in Latin. It's not supposed to be translated or interpreted by other people, right? So that's the fifth thing. Bible is in Latin, not in other languages. Latin is the appropriate language for the word of God to be expressed. And finally, the content, the scriptures themselves, should only be interpreted by priests and clergy who are trained, specially trained by the Catholic Church to understand it. Okay. On the Protestant side, it's basically the opposite in most ways. The church is usually governed by some sort of seminary which has a leader, and somehow they're elected or chosen. But it's not. There's no pope and they don't serve for life, right? They don't get chosen by a council of cardinals and then serve until they die. It's not the representative of Saint Peter or the first man amongst all humans. It's just a person that's given the leadership role, which can be changed and they can be elected more like a democratic system. Still, there are levels, but at least appointed. In the case of the Church of England by the king or queen, and in the case of Presbyterianism, a council would elevate one of their members to be the leader, the moderator. They emphasize simple worship services and try, in some churches, as few holidays as possible, but the most important ones they celebrate, but it's not elaborate. It's not a big festival or celebration, and they certainly don't, have church ales every Sunday where everybody gets drunk after church and stuff, which Catholics do. Sanctuaries are built to be plain and functional, not to be beautiful, large, and ornate. You can't worship saints or idols. It's commanded in the Old Testament that you're not allowed to do that, so they don't like it. They're more likely to follow the Mosaic Law, the Older Testament ideas, than the New Testament in many cases. Anyone can interpret the Word of God for him or herself. Women could also read the Bible. That's one of the things that they were encouraged to do. They didn't like women being too educated in general, but the Bible was okay for the most part in Protestant circles. That's something they should be able to do. And the Bible is also allowed to be written in the vernacular, which means if you're in Germany, the vernacular is German. If you're in Holland, the vernacular is Dutch. If you're in France, the vernacular is French. So the Bible can be printed in your own language that you're familiar with. Okay, so that is really what happened. There's a schism. And then after this break, which is triggered by Martin Luther, but has been, sort of being suppressed already for a while, and some people have already died. Martin Luther gets protected by certain people in Germany, and so he survives. And then people pop up here and there, Calvin in France and Knox in Scotland, and they start having their own ideas about how to organize a church and how it should be. So in Scotland, you get a certain type of Protestant belief, which is related to Calvin, the guy from French, Jean Calvin. And so they're called Calvinists, but they become Presbyterian. They make a Church of Scotland, and they call it Presbyterian after the regions and areas that they organize their kingdom into, which are called presbyters. So they call it Presbyterianism. And that is a church that most Koreans will be familiar with. Chango Gyohe is Presbyterian, and that is the Church of Scotland. This is where it comes from. No joke. I know it's a stretch. It's gone now. By the time it got to Korea, it had gone from Scotland to England, through the British Empire, over to America, spread all over America, then come through American missionaries and Canadian missionaries to Korea, and that is what started Chango Gyohe. Okay, but this is Presbyterian. This is the original Presbyterian church. This is where it comes from Scotland. So, the kings of Scotland don't really like it because they create this organization called the Kirk. That's my Scottish accent, the Kirk. And the Kirk is a group of elders in the church, and they start to organize Scottish society into a semi-democratic, religiously organized system, which is not like the triangle in the Catholic Church. So there's still Catholics in Scotland, and then there's this new group of people that think religion should be organized around everybody's right to read the Bible. So Scottish people start reading the Bible and educating themselves, and they start to become literate, and they start to. There's a whole group called the Scottish. There's a Scottish Enlightenment, and there's a whole group of really educated, creative, innovative Scottish people who come out of this. You have to argue this effort to educate everybody and to provide a Bible for everyone to read. And they do it in English as well. So once they start being trained and educated and their eyes are opened to the words in the Bible, they study other things too. So you end up with Scottish historians and philosophers and, economist Adam Smith. Everybody knows Adam Smith, the invisible hand. Engineers later. A very small country, very small population, and a huge impact on the Enlightenment, the study of humanism, philosophy, and in the Industrial Revolution. And this is largely due to the Scottish Reformation, the Reformation of the Scottish Church. So you got Presbyterians in Scotland. They're going to have a big influence on British culture. And in England, you have the Anglicans, which is the official church, which created by Henry and then continued by Edward, his son, but moved in a more Protestant direction, farther away from Catholic. And then, of course, Mary, and we're going to talk about their particular effects next class when we talk about Elizabeth. But Mary wants to make everybody Catholic again, so the Church of England starts to become part of the Catholic Church when she's the queen. But then she dies prematurely. And then when Elizabeth she's crowned, she's becomes the Queen of England. She is sort of in between the two. She likes the structure of the Catholic Church, so she wants to keep the bishops, and she wants to keep, Canterbury and York and the archbishops and the bishops and the archdeacons and the deacons and the priests and the nuns and the clerics all the way down. So she does. So she keeps some of the aspects of the Catholic Church that are similar and match, the society that she's trying to maintain, a stable monarchy. But the English Bible is allowed. People are allowed to preach in English, and they're also not for the most part doing elaborate ceremonies and worshiping saints. So it's kind of like the best way I've heard it described was by a professor named Robert Buckles, who's a great Tudor historian, and he said the thing that the best way to describe the Anglican Church is that it looks Catholic but thinks Protestant. I think that's a perfect way of describing it. It looks like the Catholic Church, but the way they practice it and what they believe and what they think is Protestant. That's what the Anglican Church is. It's a compromise. They want the appearance, but the core beliefs are Protestant. So it's half and half. It's a Protestant church, but it really looks like it's Catholic. On the other hand, there are groups in England who don't want to do anything. They don't want to have any association with the Catholic Church. They want the national connection. They don't want the Pope. They don't want any of the appearance. They want to be the opposite. They want it to be just about the Bible and just about hard work. They want it to be, in a way, they want it to be not fun. They want to be serious. Okay, they're basically killjoys. They don't want festivals. They don't want drinking. They don't want Christmas. They don't want anything. These people are called Puritans because they wanted to purify the church. Now, the word Puritan was an insult. Like, you Puritan, you're trying to, you think you're so perfect and pure and you don't want to enjoy life. You just want to study the Bible, and focus on the word and work as hard as you can and never take a break and never relax and laugh. This is what these people, some of them were like. Puritans typically wear simple black clothing and they just make buildings that are functional and for the purpose of worshiping God. But in a way, they have some strange beliefs too. Like they tend to be kind of superstitious, which is strange because they shouldn't believe in devils and ghosts because they don't believe in saints. They just believe in God and Jesus, and that's it. But they also tend to be very superstitious and suspicious of people being tempted by the devil or by doing things that are not true or real Christian behavior. So these Puritan people, there's a large group of them, and they are very committed to, they want to turn England into a Puritan state. They want the Church of England to be dissembled into a Puritan church that just focuses on God and Jesus and the Word in the Bible, and all other earthly temptations need to be removed. They're not very popular, but there's a lot of them, and they are very committed, and they believe very strongly in their beliefs are very powerful, and they are very committed to them. So they tend to be very difficult to deal with because they will interfere with other people. They believe they have a mission, and they will fight, and they are very good soldiers. Because they're so fanatical, because they believe so strongly and in their conviction of how the church should be, they tend to be very effective, persuasive, and if I think you wanted to just be left alone, they'd be pretty annoying. So you have these Puritans. They're more like the Presbyterians. The Presbyterians really don't want any of that Catholic stuff either. They want the church to be about the people and about the Bible. So the Presbyterians and the Puritans have some connection there. There's some other types of Protestant belief that start to pop up too. But basically you've got the radical Protestants, which are the Puritans, and the Presbyterians in Scotland. And then you've got the Anglicans, which are kind of a compromise, half Catholic and half Protestant, but officially Protestant. And then you have the Catholics still. They're still Catholics in England. So you've got like 4 groups here. The Irish are mostly Catholic, but there are Protestants over there who are English, and that's going to cause problems and continues to cause problems now that there's a basically Protestant part in Northern Ireland, and basically Irish, at least descended from Irish values. In the Republic of Ireland, it's officially Catholic. So this is called the Reformation. This is called the English Reformation. And these ideas, these groups of people will change the course of English history. Everything from this point until today has been affected by this split into Presbyterian, Puritan, Anglican, and Catholic. But the basic split is Catholic and Protestant. Okay? So we're going to come back to this next week on Monday because it's very relevant for the 4 tutors that we're talking about in the 16th century. Henry the Eighth, who initiates the Reformation. His son Edward, who continues it and tries to make it more Protestant. His daughter Mary, who tries to reverse it and make it Catholic again. And then his third child, and ultimately the most successful monarch of his children, Elizabeth, who rules for about 40 years. And she settles it, although the compromise that she makes only really lasts until a few kings after her. It's only a temporary solution, but it works for her during her reign. She settles on a certain type of English church, which is the one that exists today. In most respects, it's the Church of Queen Elizabeth. Okay? So that's it for today. You don't have to do any homework yet, but keep in mind you need to choose something and write that assignment. It's been posted in the assignment section on the Cyber Campus. And there'll be another lecture coming on Monday, which will add to the material for today, which is what you need to know for the quiz on Friday. And then we'll do a couple more lectures, including a review, midterm, and that'll be halfway through the class in week 8. So have a good Friday and have a good weekend. The weather's beautiful. Be very careful. Don't get the coronavirus. And we'll see you again next week. Thank you for listening.